My family disrespected my wife at dinner and treated us like we didn't belong, but they didn't know I owned the house they lived in. So, by the end of the night, I made a few calls that turned their life upside down. A 36-year-old male who has spent the last decade creating a real estate portfolio in the Midwest. I started with one foreclosure home when I was 26. I fixed it up myself, rented it out, and kept investing. Nothing extravagant or dramatic, just consistent hard work-wise purchases during the 2012 housing crisis, and a lot of patience when everyone else was buying new trucks and taking vacations. When I purchased the first property, it was a complete catastrophe. The bank foreclosure had been empty for 8 months, had been vandalized twice, and had a roof leak that wrecked half of the ceiling. Most folks took one look and then went away. I spotted an opportunity and spent 6 months performing the work myself, ripping out rotting drywall, rebuilding the roof, updating the electrical, and refinishing the hardwood floors that were concealed behind nasty carpet. I learned everything from YouTube videos and advice from the folks at the hardware shop. I made plenty of mistakes. I once wired an outlet backward and almost ignited a fire. Another time, I built a toilet that leaked for 3 days before I realized what had gone wrong. But each error taught me something, and by the time I was done, that house looked nicer than half the neighborhood. We rented it out for $900 per month, which felt like a fortune at the time. I used the rental revenue and my day job earnings to save for the next home. I lived in a studio apartment that cost $400 per month, drove a 15-year-old automobile, ate a lot of rice and chicken. My coworkers thought I was crazy for not improving my lifestyle, but I had a plan. Everything changed with the crash in 2012. Banks were desperate to sell foreclosed properties. I'd saved around $45,000 by that point, and it suddenly bought a lot more than it would have a few years ago. I bought 3 properties in 20 months. All of them were foreclosures and needed work. I spent my weekends and evenings fixing them up, learning plumbing, HVAC, and basic carpentry. By the time I was 32, I had 10 properties. By 34, I'd reached 15. Now, at the age of 36, I own 18 homes that generate approximately $24,000 in monthly rent. After mortgages, insurance, taxes, maintenance, and unforeseen repairs, I earn approximately $9,000 per month in passive income. With my day job managing logistics for a manufacturing company, I'm doing more than fine. Now I own 18 rental properties in 3 counties, including single-family homes, duplexes, and a small apartment building. Total worth is around $3.5 million with approximately $1.2 million in equity after mortgages. I'm not rich by any means, but I'm comfortable enough that I don't have to worry about bills and can take my wife out to dinner without first checking my account. The labor is not glamorous, dealing with damaged water heaters at 2 a.m. Tenants who believe rent is optional. City inspectors who are delighted about discovering code infractions from 1987, but it is mine. I built it, and it pays my bills while also offering me independence. Most people with normal employment will never have. My wife Ella is originally from the Philippines. I met her 6 years ago at a neighborhood function thanks to a mutual friend, one of those volunteer opportunities where you can spend a Saturday painting a community center. She was up on a ladder, cutting in edges along the ceiling with the most steady hand I'd ever seen, cracking jokes with the other volunteers while performing precision work that would have taken me 3 times as long. We started talking during the lunch break. She was humorous, smart, and had a way of pointing out foolishness without being nasty. When someone protested about having to be there on a Saturday, she simply smiled and responded, "Well, nobody forced you to volunteer for voluntary work." The man quickly shut up. I asked her out the same day. We went for coffee and talked for 4 hours, and I realized she was unlike anyone I'd ever dated before. She had goals, a strong work ethic, and no tolerance for drama. She'd tell you precisely what she thought, but she'd do it in a way that made you feel safe rather than attacked. That is a rare skill. She is a registered nurse at County General and works night shifts in the ICU, dealing with urgent cases that most people cannot handle psychologically or emotionally. I've heard her stories about coding patients at 3 a.m. and dealing with families that believe that screaming at medical staff can speed up the healing process for their loved ones, making split-second decisions that impact someone's life or death. The woman has the most patience and grace under pressure of anyone I've ever met. We were married 3 years ago. A small ceremony was held at a park pavilion with approximately 50 people in attendance. Her family had flown in from Manila. Parents, 2 siblings, 1 aunt, and 3 cousins. They were friendly and inviting from the start, treating me like family despite the fact that they knew little about me. Her father approached me at the reception and said, "You take care of my daughter and we'll get along fine." Simple, direct, no drama. My relatives arrived but made things awkward by asking hard questions about green cards and work visas. During the reception, my aunt asked Ella in front of everyone how long she had been in our country and if she was here legally. Ella handled the situation with more grace than they deserved, smiling and gently explaining that she had been a citizen for years. Meanwhile, I calculated how much force I could apply to physically remove my aunt from the arena without causing a disturbance. The hardest thing was my mom approaching me before the ceremony and asking if I was certain about this. Not in a sympathetic mother concerned for her son's sense, but in a, "Are you sure you want to marry one of them" way? She didn't say it directly, but the connotation was clear enough for Ella to notice. My brother Nathan is 3 years older, works in middle management at a manufacturing facility, and has spent his entire adult life convinced that he is brighter than everyone else, despite evidence to the contrary. He has opinions on everything, including politics, economics, parenting, and proper lawn management, and will share them whether you ask or not. Rachel, his wife, is cut from the same fabric. Stay-at-home mom who views it as a professional accomplishment, continually commenting on social media about the most difficult job in the world, while her mother looks after the kids 3 days a week. She has a condescending attitude about people who work in the service industry, which is odd given that she was a waitress when Nathan met her. They have 3 children, Lily 16, Max 14, and little Raina 9. Lily is the one who initiated this whole situation, but we'll get to that. My folks are what you'd call Midwest conventional, which means they're quietly racist while claiming not to be. They would never say anything explicitly offensive. Despite the fact that Ella is from Manila, people ask her where she is from approximately twice a year. They LA her English as if it were astonishing that she could articulate entire phrases. Dad once told me I was brave for marrying someone from a different culture, as if I had adopted a rescue dog rather than married a fully functional adult female. Family dynamics have always been tense but managed. Sunday meals at my parents' house, awkward small conversation, me holding my tongue when someone said something stupid, then coming home and venting to Ella who'd simply shrug and say she'd dealt with worse at the hospital. Here's what made things even more complex. I own residences where various family members live my parents' home, which I purchased for them 5 years ago when they were facing foreclosure due to Dad's mounting medical expenditures from his heart surgery. I paid $140,000 cash, recorded the deed in my name, and allowed them to live there rent-free. They believe they still possess it, since I never corrected this presumption. It seemed easier than dealing with the pride issues Nathan and Rachel's residence. In 2019, I purchased it as an investment property, a great 4-bedroom in a decent school area. They were renting from a landlord who was selling, so I bought it and allowed them to continue paying the same rate. $1,500 per month for a home that should rent for $2,400. Family discount. You know they have no idea I am their landlord. Their rent checks are routed to a property management business I use. So they just think they're blessed to have a reasonable landlord who never raises the rent. My Uncle David, Dad's brother, and his wife Laura rent a duplex on the east side of town that I own. They know I'm the landlord, but I charge them the same family rate, $900 per month, for a $1,600 property. David has been on disability for years following a working accident, so I figured I was assisting family members. My cousin Luke, Nathan's son, technically, although we grew up together as brothers, rents a little house from me near the campus. He is attempting to complete his engineering degree at the age of 29, having dropped out twice before. I charge him $700 per month for a property that might easily fetch $1,100. He knows I own it, and he's always paid on time and kept the apartment in good condition. So essentially, I'm supporting half of my family's housing expenditures, and the majority of them are unaware of it. I never brought it up since it sounded awkward, and I didn't need the attention. It was great to help out family members who were hurting. This was before the dinner last month. My mother called and said we were having a huge family supper at her house. Nathan's birthday was approaching, and she wanted everyone together. I nearly said no. These things are typically uncomfortable, but Ella urged we attend because family is essential and maybe things will be better this time. Spoiler alert, things did not improve this time. We arrived around 6 p.m. We'll bring them a lovely bottle of grape juice because we don't drink as well as homemade cake. Ella spent 3 hours decorating. Chocolate cake with buttercream icing, piped roses around the edges, and Happy Birthday Nathan written in flawless script across the top. The woman went above and beyond to win over those who had already determined they didn't like her. I had seen her in our kitchen that afternoon, painstakingly measuring materials, testing the frosting consistency, and recreating one of the flowers 3 times since it wasn't perfect enough. When I asked why she was going to so much bother for people who hardly noticed her existence, she merely shrugged and said, maybe this time would be different. Maybe if she tried hard enough, they'd finally see her as family. I didn't have the courage to tell her I had given up hope years ago. The first indicator of trouble was when we stepped in and found Lily seated in the living room with 2 of her pals. They were both blonde, dressed expensively, and looked at us as if we were door-to-door marketers rather than family. I had known it was Nathan's birthday supper. I hadn't realized it was also Lily's Sweet 16 planning party. "Oh, you're here," Rachel remarked when she spotted us, as if our presence was unexpected, despite Mom's 2 confirmations of the particular invitation and time. "We're running a little late," Nathan said, still getting ready. Behind wasn't the word for it. The party was clearly in full swing, music playing, food already set out, people laughing and talking. We were just the last people they'd wanted to actually show up. The house looked great, by the way. New furniture in the living room, one of those expensive sectionals from the furniture store that advertises during football games. Fresh paint in the dining room in that trendy gray color everyone's using now. Landscaping outside, that must have cost a few thousand. Professional flower beds, new shrubs, decorative rocks arranged in patterns that screamed, "We hired someone," all funded by below rent on a house I owned. But who's counting? I bought that house as an investment property in 2019 for $185,000, put $45,000 down, rented it to them for $1,500 a month, when comparable places in that school district were going for $2,400 to $2,600. They'd been there 4 years now, and I'd never raised the rent once. Basically gave them a free $800 to $1,100 every single month while they redecorated with money they saved by not paying market rate. Ella offered to help in the kitchen, but Rachel waved her off with this fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh no, we've got everything under control. Why don't you simply wait in the living room?" Translation: "We don't need help from you people." So we sat on the new sectional in the living room while Lily and her friends giggled and whispered across from us. I could hear fragments of their conversation even though they were pretending to be subtle. "Is that his wife? She looks so young. I heard she's not even from here. My mom says she probably just wanted a green card." Ella heard it as well. She just smiled and scrolled through her phone, pretending not to notice. The woman has dealt with worse in hospital waiting rooms. Families who refuse to let her touch their sick relatives because of how she looks. Patients who demand American nurses. Doctors who assume she's a medical assistant instead of an RN with 10 years of experience. But I could see the tension in her shoulders. The way she was breathing, just a little too carefully. The tight smile that meant she was swallowing something she wanted to say. I reached over and squeezed her hand. She squeezed back but didn't look up from her phone. After about 20 minutes of uncomfortable sitting, while the party continued around us like we were invisible, Rachel finally announced dinner was ready. Everyone started moving toward the dining room, and that's when I saw the setup. When it was finally time to eat, Rachel had set up a beautiful dining room table. Looked like something from a magazine spread or one of those home decorating shows Ella watches. Good china, the kind with gold trim that you only use for special occasions. Cloth napkins folded into shapes that probably had names. Centerpiece with fresh flowers that definitely came from an actual florist, not the grocery store. She'd gone all out. There were name cards at each seat. Fancy calligraphy name cards and little silver holders. Everyone else was at the main dining table. Mom and Dad at the heads. Nathan and Rachel in the places of honor as birthday boy and hostess. Max and Raina on one side. Uncle David and Aunt Laura across from them. Luke next to some of Rachel's relatives I'd never met. Some of Lily's friends were even seated at the main table, probably 15 people total. All seated in the formal dining room with the good china and the flowers and the cloth napkins. Ella and I had name cards too, at a small folding table, the kind you get at a hardware store for $10. In the hallway next to the coat closet and the bathroom close enough to hear the conversation, but far enough away to make it clear we weren't part of it. I stood there staring at this setup, thinking I'd misunderstood something. Maybe the main table was genuinely full, and this was the overflow seating. But no, there were two empty chairs at the main table, one on each side, and the folding table was clearly set up as an afterthought. One of those plastic numbers with the metal legs that wobbled on uneven ground. "What's this?" I asked Rachel, my voice low. "Oh, we ran out of room at the big table," she said breezily, not making eye contact. "But don't worry, you'll still be able to hear everything. We didn't want you to feel left out." Left out while literally leaving us out. Ella touched my arm gently. "It's fine," she said quietly in that voice she uses when something's very much not fine. But she's trying to keep the peace. "Let's just sit." But I was still processing the visual, still trying to make sense of how we'd gone from family members to hallway overflow seating. Everyone else at the nice table with the good china and cloth napkins and fresh flowers. Ella and I had a plastic folding table with paper plates and plastic forks, like we were at a kid's birthday party at a park. My mom was already seated carefully, not looking in our direction. My dad was studying his water glass like it contained the meaning of life. Uncle David and Aunt Laura exchanged uncomfortable glances but said nothing. They knew something was wrong but weren't going to risk making waves. Luke looked genuinely upset, but he was just a kid at this point. No power to change the seating arrangement his aunt had orchestrated. That's when Lily decided to add her contribution to the evening. "We don't really sit with you people anyway," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. She was looking directly at Ella when she said it. The room went silent. One of those heavy silences where everyone suddenly becomes very interested in their napkins. I waited for someone to say something to correct her, to tell a 16-year-old that you don't talk to people like that. Nathan cleared his throat. "Lily, that's not... I mean, what she says is what she says." Rachel jumped in, smiling in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "Is that the main table for the core family? Do you understand?" Ella squeezed my hand under the table. "That's messed up," he muttered, but not loudly enough to challenge anyone. My mother was studying her plate as if it contained the secrets of the universe, and my father was suddenly very focused on cutting his bread roll. Uncle David and Aunt Laura exchanged uncomfortable glances but said nothing, while Luke looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I need you to begin eviction proceedings for 3 properties. Yes, tonight. I'll send you the locations in a minute." The table had gone silent to dead quiet, and everyone was staring. No, there's nothing wrong with the properties. I'm just done providing family discounts to people who don't deserve it." I could see Nathan's face start to comprehend what was going on. He'd gone pale. The second call was to my real estate attorney, Henry, who left a voicemail because it was Sunday evening. "Hey Henry, Jack's here. I need you to draft certain paperwork for me. I am transferring ownership of the property at 447 Maple Street. Return to the bank. Mom and Dad can discuss additional payment options with them. I'll explain tomorrow." My mother gasped, and my father's face turned red. The third call was to my accountant, David. "I need you to restructure my portfolio. I'm moving 3 properties to market rate immediately and selling one. I know it's Sunday. I'll double your usual fee for weekend work." I ended the call and looked around the table. Everyone was frozen, as if someone had pressed pause on their lives. "So here's what's about to happen," I said calmly, looking directly at Nathan. "Your rent is going to market rate starting next month. That's $2,400 instead of the $1,500 you've been paying. You'll get official notice tomorrow." Nathan's mouth was opening and closing like a fish. Rachel had gone white. I turned to Uncle David. "You too. $1,600 a month starting next month. If you can't afford it, you've got 60 days to find somewhere else." Aunt Laura started crying. Uncle David just stared at his plate. "And Mom, Dad, the house you think you own, you don't. I own it. I've been letting you live there free because I thought family helped family, but apparently I'm not core family. So I'm transferring the deed back to the bank. You can negotiate your own mortgage with them. Good luck with that on Dad's retirement income." My mother was crying now too. "You can't do this." "Actually, I can. I own the properties. I can do whatever I want with them." Nathan finally found his voice. "This is insane. Over a seating arrangement?" "No," I said quietly. I turned to Lily, who was crying now, presumably realizing for the first time that her actions had consequences. It had been years of treating my wife as if she wasn't good enough for this family with subtle comments, assumptions, and looks. Today was the final straw. And I said, you just cost your parents about $900 a month, your grandparents, their house, and your uncle, his affordable rent. I hope that comment was worthwhile. Ella stood up beside me. We're leaving, she said calmly. We walked out, left the cake on their counter, the grape juice on their table, and they all sat in stunned silence. Ella was silent in the car for quite some time before saying, "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. Your family will detest you now. They had already shown me disrespect. At least now they'll think twice before disrespecting you." She smiled a little. That was pretty dramatic. I'm a dramatic guy. No, you're really not. That's what made it so effective. The next morning, I followed through on everything. Tina sent official notices to all 3 properties about rent increases and terms changes, certified mail return receipt requested exactly by the book. Henry began the paperwork on transferring my parents' house back to the bank, which my accountant William worked tirelessly to restructure the portfolio exactly as I had requested, moving properties from family, subsidized to market rate categories in his spreadsheets. It felt good to watch professionals execute a plan with precision. There was no drama, no emotion, just business being handled the way it should be. The phone call began around 10 a.m. Nathan was the first, and he was screaming not just loudly, but at full volume about how I was destroying his family for nothing, how I was being petty and vindictive, and how this was going to ruin everything they'd built. I let him vent for about 30 seconds while I sipped my coffee and checked my email, then calmly interrupted him. "Nathan, the market rate for your house is actually $2,600 per month, and I'm being generous by only charging $2,400. You're still getting a family discount, just a smaller one, and you can take it or leave it." He sputtered something about not being able to afford it, about having 3 kids and a mortgage, except he didn't have a mortgage. He had a landlord, me, and the landlord was adjusting rent to reflect actual market conditions. He demanded, "Where else are we supposed to go?" "That's not my problem. You've got 30 days to decide. Pay the new rate or move out. Your choice." He accepted it, obviously. Where else was he going to find a 4-bedroom in that school district for that price? Comparable houses were renting for hundreds more, and he'd have to come up with security deposits and moving costs. He was trapped by his own financial mismanagement, and my generosity had been the only thing keeping him up. My mother called next, crying and saying I was breaking her heart, sobbing about how she never thought her own son would do this to his parents, about how disappointed my late grandmother would be, about how family was supposed to take care of family. I reminded her that she had watched her granddaughter insult my wife at a family dinner and said absolutely nothing, 0 words of correction, 0 acknowledgement that it was wrong, 0 defense of a daughter-in-law. "You heard it, Mom. You all heard it. You just didn't care enough to say anything." I hung up while she was mid-sobbing, and my father called an hour later using the authoritative parent voice he'd used on me throughout my childhood. The stern, disappointed tone that used to make me want to fix whatever I'd done wrong and earn back his approval told me I was being childish and needed to reconsider this rash decision, that we could sit down like adults and work something out that was fair to everyone. "I've already been fair, Dad. I've been more than fair for 5 years. You've lived rent-free in a home I purchased with my money, while Nathan paid half the market rate and Uncle David paid even less. The only thing that has changed is that you're all going to pay what everyone else pays." He tried to argue that family was different, that you don't treat family like business transactions, and that there should be some loyalty and consideration for the people who raised me. But I told him I'd had a lot of second thoughts. Specifically, I'd reconsidered subsidizing the housing of people who didn't respect my marriage. He had 2 options: work out a mortgage with the bank or find another place to live. And they weren't changing no matter how many guilt trips he tried. "You're making a huge mistake," he said, his voice hard. "The only mistake I made was thinking you'd ever see Ella as family." I hung up. Uncle David called around noon and was actually apologetic, which caught me off guard. He said he understood why I was angry and that he had planned to say something at the dinner but didn't want to cause drama in front of everyone. David could afford it if he cut back on the toys he'd accumulated over the years. The boat he never used sat in his driveway under a tarp 11 months a year, the RV they'd taken on 2 trips in 5 years, and the motorcycle that mostly just leaked oil on the driveway. "I get it," he remarked gently. We messed up. Kelly and I both noticed what was going on and should have spoken up. Yes, you should have. For what it's worth, both of us like Ella. She's good folks. Then maybe act like it next time. We finished the call on decent terms, but the rent hike stood. Luke called last and was surprisingly supportive. Said what happened at dinner was terrible, and he didn't blame me one bit for doing what I did. He'd been uncomfortable the whole time watching Ella and me get segregated to the hallway table. But he was just a cousin trying to finish school and didn't feel like he had the standing to call out his aunt and uncle. I told him his rent wasn't changing. He'd always been respectful and decent, paid on time, took care of the property, and never once made Ella feel unwelcome. I was happy to keep helping him finish his engineering degree with below-market rent because he'd earned it by being an actual decent human being. He actually offered to pay more. Said it didn't feel right getting special treatment when everyone else was losing it. You're not getting special treatment, I told him. You're getting rewarded for basic human decency. The fact that it appears unique says a lot about the rest of this family. He chuckled and said he'd keep his head down and complete school. I encouraged him to come over for dinner someday, and Ella would like cooking for someone who genuinely appreciated her. The family group chat exploded, so I muted it and didn't read anything. 3 days later, Rachel arrived to my office, clearly upset, makeup smudged, and looking nothing like her normal put-together self. "Can we talk?" she inquired. I allowed her in. She sat down and immediately began with the apologies. She was so sorry. They'd taught Lily better than that. It was just teenage attitude. They never intended for things to escalate this far. "Do you know how this will affect our finances?" she inquired. "We cannot afford an additional $900 each month. Nathan's job doesn't pay that much." I pointed out that they had just spent thousands of dollars redecorating a house they didn't own and planning a Sweet 16 party, indicating that they had some discretionary income. She started crying harder. That was savings. We were saving for Lily's party. She'll only turn 16 once, and Ella will only be offended at family dinner once, or at least she should be. Rachel tried a new approach. "What can we do to make this right? Lily will apologize. We all will. Please don't do this to us." "It's already done." I said notices have been sent. The contracts have been updated. You can either pay the new rate or relocate. Where are we supposed to find an extra $900 per month? "I'm not sure, Rachel. Perhaps Nathan may request a raise. Perhaps you could find a job. Maybe you could cut back on the redecorating and extravagant birthday parties." "That's not my concern." She walked away crying. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from an attorney representing my parents who were suing me for elder abuse and claiming I had promised them the house. When I showed the deed with my name on it and bank records showing I'd paid for it in full, the case was dismissed. Their attorney later apologized to me, saying he told my parents they didn't have a case, but they insisted on filing. Nathan and Rachel began paying the new rent, but they were clearly struggling. I heard through Luke that they had canceled Lily's Sweet 16 party and put the boat up for sale. Rachel got a part-time job at a medical office doing reception work. Uncle David and Aunt Laura paid the increased rent for 2 months, then moved to a cheaper duplex across town. I understood that they couldn't afford it on disability income, so I wrote them a nice. My parents had to work out a mortgage with the bank, but at current market rates, instead of the sweetheart deal they would have gotten years ago when they actually owned the house. Their monthly payment nearly doubled, and Dad had to unretire and take a part-time job at a hardware store. The family stopped inviting us to events, which was exactly what I wanted. No more awkward dinners, no more subtle comments, no more pretending everything was fine. Luke still came over for dinner on occasion. He was a nice guy and Ella loved him. He apologized about 10 times for not speaking up more forcefully at the dinner. I told him not to be concerned. He was just a renter trying to finish school. It was not his responsibility to monitor his aunt and uncle's behavior. About 3 months after the dinner incident, I received a text from Lily, who apologized profusely for being young stupid and influenced by her parents' attitudes. She had started volunteering at a community center with immigrant families and realized how ignorant she had been. I appreciated the apology, but I did not respond. Some lessons must be learned. 6 months later, Nathan called, not yelling this time, but humble, and said he wanted to apologize, that he'd been thinking about what happened and realized they'd been wrong. "I get it now," he said. "We treated Ella like garbage, and you were right to be angry. I wasn't angry, so I corrected him. I was done." "Fair enough." Is there any way we can, I'm not sure, correct this? You can begin by showing my wife respect when you see her in public. You can stop forming assumptions about people based on where they come from. You can teach your children better. We're trying. Rachel has been working with Lily on cultural sensitivity issues. Good. Is the rent ever going to go down? No, he sighed. I figured, but I had to ask. We're no longer close. We are excluded from family functions, which is great with me. My parents and I share a friendly but distant relationship. We exchange Christmas cards. I make sure they're not literally homeless, but the warmth is gone. Ella handles it all with the same grace she shows everything else, saying she's dealt with worse racism from patients, families who refuse to let her treat them because of her appearance. At least my family's bigotry had consequences. The real victory was seeing my wife realize she didn't have to tolerate disrespect just to keep peace with people who didn't respect her in the first place. She'd been trying to win over my family for 3 years, and in one dinner she got permission to stop trying. We now spend holidays with her family, either flying to Manila or hosting them here. Ella suggested that we close on another rental property, a nice duplex near the university, and rent it to international students at reasonable rates. Her parents are warm, welcoming, and treat me as if I were their own son, despite our cultural differences. We're working with the International Student Office to make it happen, and my real estate portfolio is doing better than ever. It turns out that running a business based on actual market rates, rather than family favor pricing, is more profitable. Rachel occasionally posts passive-aggressive things about family loyalty and forgiveness on social media, which I muted, but Luke screenshots the good ones and sends them to me. We have a good laugh about it. Lily graduated high school last month, and I sent her a card with a $50 gift card to a bookstore. It was a small gesture, but it felt right. She's apparently going to community college and majoring in social work. Rachel complained about it in the family group chat, which I still have muted, but Luke keeps me updated. She wished Lily would do something more respectable like business or nursing. Some people never learn. The lesson I took from all of this is that you can't buy respect with generosity. You can subsidize someone's housing costs, help them financially go above and beyond to keep the peace, and they'll still treat you like garbage if they've decided you're not worth their respect. However, you can absolutely charge market rates to people who don't appreciate the discount, and that's almost as fulfilling as true respect. Ella is still a night shift ICU nurse, still saving lives and dealing with difficult people with more grace than they deserve. And I'm still buying, fixing up, and developing something that's truly my and my family. They're still paying their rent on time because they know what happens when they don't. Some people called me petty, but I prefer to think of it as setting boundaries with financial consequences. You don't get to insult my wife and still benefit from my generosity. That's not how this works. The properties I own are doing well, and the tenants who respect the arrangement are treated fairly. And the ones who learned the hard way are still learning. And Ella and I are building a life surrounded by people who actually value us. Her family, our friends, the international students who are grateful for a landlord who treats them fairly rather than exploiting their vulnerability. That's more valuable than any family dinner at the core family table. My father called last week and asked if we might consider coming to Nathan's birthday dinner next month. He said they'd really like to have us there, that it wouldn't be the same without us. I asked if Ella would be seated at the main table. Of course, he finally said. I'll think about it, I told him. I probably won't go. Some bridges are best left burning, but it was great to be asked properly.